Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Kirklees Local Television's Weekly Wind-Up. As usual, I'm Warwick, bringing you news and opinions on topical issues. Joining me this week are Ben Wright, a Managing Director at Waves Community Centre in Slathwaite, and also joining us is Chaz Ball, a member of the Green Party who is the candidate for the Colne Valley. First up on this week's programme, we take a look at the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or as it is known, TTIP. TTIP is a trade agreement that's been hammered out between the EU and the US. Until recently, negotiations have been secretive, yet information has begun to filter out through freedom of information requests and leaked documents. The deal has been described in certain circles as undemocratic and an attack on sovereign power of nation states by big corporations. This idea has been described as scaremongering by the deal supporters. Chaz, I'm going to come to you first. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that TTIP relates to?
Yeah, thank you. I was interested in this subject because we went to a lobby with Jason McCartney, our MP, on Saturday. And I think we explored the potential benefits to business of liberalising trade regulations and making it sort of easier to sell goods from British companies to the United States and vice versa. But I think the proposed trade agreement has quite a lot of dangers in it in creating a more powerful role for big corporations. So on balance, I think there is a proposed trade agreement that we should be fearful of if it actually creates a situation where big corporations have more power over our lives and small businesses actually don't benefit.
So would you describe the deal as being weighted towards corporations as opposed to the needs of nation states?
I think there's a sort of dumbing down that's possible when you see that if a trade agreement came into place that actually equalised regulations on cosmetics, on health, on energy, that were set by what's prevalent in the United States, then we would have to, in a sense, give up quite a lot of the safeguards that we've worked for in this country and in the EU for the public. And it's about whether that's a sacrifice worth making in the hope that we would get more jobs out of it. And I think that there is a balance to be struck, but I'm not convinced that that American food regulations are something we should accept when our health is at stake and when animal welfare is at stake.
There is one of the main aims for the United States is to include investor-state dispute settlements that some say could allow big corporations, big companies to sue governments over policies that detrimentally affect profits. The example that I've got here is in Germany. The Swedish energy supplier Vattenfall is using a similar clause to sue the German government because they feel the Germans' decision to turn their back on nuclear energy dependency after the Fukushima tragedy will hit the future profits. Should the people of Britain be worried about such a clause being included in TTIP?
I think the problem, I think we should, yes. I think the problem with ISDS it's a form of arbitration when there's a dispute between a corporation and a country, a government, that works outside the legal system. It's a form of arbitration that bypasses the normal legal system and is in a sense run by corporate lawyers. And it seems to me that there's a risk here that big corporations will flex their muscles when they feel they're going to lose money because we want, as a society, perhaps more regulation about tobacco, which is one of the areas where corporations feel they're going to lose money because we're going to have tighter regulation. And you could say the same about food standards, about cosmetics, about energy. So in the end, I think there is a problem that we have to ask our representatives, what's wrong with our courts and our legal system, where if there is a dispute, it should be subject to something that's accountable to our democratic system, not something that bypasses it.
Ben, does the idea of a a big company, say a tobacco manufacturer, there's been plans in government to scale back advertising on cigarette packages. Does the idea that a cigarette or tobacco company could sue the British government for making a decision like that, does that worry you at all?
I don't. All I think is really, as long as your decisions are evidence-based, so if you're saying that you want to scale back on advertising for tobacco, you need to have clear evidence that doing that will reduce the amount of people smoking, and why. We all know now that it's got a good link with cancer. But the same with energy. I think if a government is going to make a decision on nuclear power which goes against what the evidence is saying, the overwhelming evidence says that nuclear power is very safe, much safer than most other types, those companies, I do think, should have a right to protect their ongoing business.
So as a member of the Green Party, how do you feel about that, Chaz? Do you feel that people, energy companies should be able to, any company should be able to protect their investment?
One of the examples that we haven't used is what's happening in Quebec, which is where there is a threat from an American company to the Quebec government because the Quebec government has put a moratorium on fracking. Now, they've put a moratorium on fracking because there is uncertainty about the environmental effects on water quality and on local areas where fracking goes underground. I think that's quite legitimate for the Quebec government to do that, and it seems to me it's not just about the evidence base you talked about, Ben. It's about on balance there is a cost, and the cost is too high for society. It's unquantifiable. I wouldn't necessarily agree that nuclear power is safer, but even if I did, I'd be worried about the cost of nuclear power, and that it's quite legitimate for a British government to decide to reduce emphasis on nuclear power and move to another form of energy, so long as it's properly discussed and is part of a sovereign state's right to do that.
Again, though, politicians aren't physicists, and if they're willing to ignore what a nuclear physicist tells them and make policies on it, surely a business is allowed to put their argument forward and protect their right to make money.
If you looked at the evidence of how many members of Parliament of both parties deny the scientific evidence on climate change, you'd be horrified.
Oh no, I am horrified.
Certainly there's
That's my point. There's no science.
Certainly there's a lot of contentious issues within the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Do you feel that enough is being done to inform the general population about the possibilities that are contained within the deal?
At one level, there's a lot of activity within a European Citizens Initiative in 28 countries is very active, and particularly it started in Berlin, it is now embraced every country. So at one level, we are having an impact, those of us who are concerned about it within the Commission. And recently they did a consultation on this ISDS dispute resolution, and 97% of the respondents were against it, and they closed the consultation. On the other hand, I think because it's a very slow-moving negotiation that's done in secret, we aren't seeing enough debate about it in Britain yet. But I think I'm very pleased that you put it on your agenda so we can help inform people in Huddersfield and Kirklees about it.
Absolutely. And finally, could you sum up why people of Kirklees should care about TTIP?
I think it's because if it became the prevailing trade agreement with North America, it would strip away obstacles to large corporations who want to make profits and who will inevitably look for the best angle to do so. And that angle could result in the reduction of the standards that we currently apply to what's sold over the counter with cosmetics, with tobacco, with food. And I think there is also a threat to our public services. So it's very important that people realise that this could encourage privatisation within the health service simply by making those who let contracts very worried about the way in which the big corporations want to get hold of those contracts. This would liberalise the whole process towards American companies.
Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, it's all we have time for on this topic. If you would like to have a say on anything you hear on today's programme, please do get in contact with the Weekly Wind-Up. You can do so by email, info@kirkleeslocaltv.com, or you can also find us on Twitter by searching @the Weekly Wind-Up. Please join us after this short break.
Hello,
Good morning
and welcome.
and welcome again to this week's Weekly Wind-Up.
The programme that discusses news at the heart of the Kirklees community.
So a lot of people come, not for food growing, surprisingly, but because they're really passionate.
It's been people in Huddersfield who have been taking part in the challenge, and it's basically asking people to only eat and drink for £1 a day.
Tell people, go to the market, forget Sainsbury's, Tesco's, go to the open market, you will get 10 times the amount of fruit and vegetables, and it's fantastic.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week.
But please do join us for the next edition on Weekly Wind-Up.
And welcome back. With me this week is Chaz Ball and Ben Wright. Now we're going to go straight on to what has been described as a crisis situation within the NHS. With A&Es locally and nationwide seeing ever-rising numbers, staff have been feeling the strain since before Christmas. The increased strain has been attributed variously to drunkenness, cuts to elderly care and in some circles, immigration. Firstly, Chaz, I'll come to you again. Firstly, I'd like to know whether the current situation, do you feel, can be eased under a government that is so keen on implementing austerity measures?
Well, I think some of this has got to do with funding, but I mean, but I think some of it's got to do with the way policies are implemented. I think the problems with the cutbacks in care, which local authorities have been forced to undertake, is at the root cause of some of the problems of this lack of capacity of beds in hospitals. But I also think that there must be a better settlement about how GPs operate. There's clearly an underfunding within GPs if there are people having to wait for 2 or 3 days for an appointment. They seem to be amongst those who then make a beeline for accident and emergency. So, but in the end, I think the most important area that we could overlook if we're not careful is the importance of staff goodwill and commitment to the health service, and we're in danger of losing that if we overload them with so much, crisis management. And I think we have to have another look at how we invest in training of staff and provision of adequate staff to these very stressful situations. And if we don't deal with it, we will lose it in the sense that we will lose the most precious thing of all, which is having an effective service.
Ben, how do you feel about that? Have you seen a sort of degradation in services over the past 5 years, maybe?
In my sector, daycare for adults with learning disabilities has started to shut down a lot more, as in Kirklees run day centres, and I myself am a privately run day centre within Kirklees, so I'm someone who is providing a private solution where there used to be a public sector. In that case, I don't think there's too much of an issue, to be honest. I mean, we're still governed by the CQC and places like this, which are government institutions themselves, so we're regulated within a framework and we have to stick in that framework. As for the NHS, I mean, like anyone else, I could point out things that are going wrong. For solutions, I wouldn't have the first idea where to look.
It's very honest of you. Chaz, what do you feel could be done to help ease the burden, particularly on A&Es? I know you mentioned briefly there about improving the services at GPs. Do you feel that is the way to go?
Well, I think there's no one solution. You know, I think when I've listened to people who are involved in the service talking about what they need, it's clearly got a lot to do with making it a place where people want to work. So there's understaffing in accident and emergency because it's such a tough place to work, because in a sense it's not the place you would want to put your career into. So there has to be some significant look at manpower planning. Do we train enough nurses? Do we train enough midwives rather than importing them from other countries? Do we have sufficient capacity within general practice so that people can get an appointment within, a couple of days? But underlying all this is this emphasis on dealing with illness. Personally, I would like to see more investment in public health, more emphasis on those things we can all do better if we're helped to do it with exercise, with diet, and with looking after ourselves, because that in the end is going to save the health service a great deal of money.
Yeah. Is that, so I saw you nodding there, Ben. You feel prevention is better than...
In every case, I can't think of a situation where prevention is, you do always want to be preventing rather than, solving a problem that could be, prevented in the first place. The one other thing that I would, as for a problem for the NHS going forward is, and it's mentioned often, how the public are ageing, and we're living a longer time, and with that comes extra health problems that we wouldn't have had to deal with when life expectancy was 60, 65. We're now living, my daughter is the first generation where they're saying that it's going to be a regular thing for them to live to 100. You've got to think of the stress that that's going to put on the public health service.
But also, people are less able to call on their family support where people live further apart from their families in many areas.
Yeah.
And that seems to be, that's where I think there's a really importance to create more of the other social networks that help people stay in their own homes. And there are some quite ambitious local authority plans in some parts of the country that really encourage this. And I think some of this is, is dealing with a problem before it becomes a health service problem.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, people are having less children as well. So for that sort of safety net that you would maybe fall back on your children if you found yourself in ill health, when you're having one child, compared to back in the day when it used to be a few more, you got less of a safety net,
I saw a very interesting article the other day on that topic about not just about people who only have one child to look after them when they get old, but then what happens when that child reaches an elderly age, they don't have any siblings. There's people maybe they may get married, the spouse dies, and then they're on their own to care for themselves. How do you manage that situation before it becomes much bigger? So I think that's an interesting thing to look at as well. Another point is what's been described as kind of creeping privatisation in the NHS. In Yorkshire, the ambulance services spending on private ambulances has risen by 267% since 2011. Should the public be worried about creeping privatisation in the NHS, Chaz?
I think they should. I think from what I've read, 84% of the British public think the NHS should be run in the public sector. We were never that keen on privatisation in some other sectors as well, but let's stick to the health service. And I feel as though the real danger is fragmentation. The strength of the health service as it grew up was in different specialisms, different areas, working together and seeing the whole person and allowing that person to benefit from different sorts of services. The minute that you begin to cream off certain specialisms and allow them to be contracted, you undermine the economics of the basic all-purpose hospital and all-purpose service. So I think it's not just privatisation, it's fragmentation, and it's this lack of the ability to retain the commitment of staff within the private sector that is, I think, a well-run public sector is far more able to benefit from that commitment that staff have.
Ben, you mentioned there you're the runner of a business that is a privatisation of something that may have been taken care of by the NHS. How do you feel about
I think it's Part of our CQC come to check if we're running our business correctly, and part of it is communication. So we have to show that we talk to other organisations who have things to do with our clients, our members that come to us. So with proper checks in place to make sure that you are communicating, we can nullify some of that issue, but we are a much more simple organisation than like the NHS or a hospital, for example. So having a conversation within those places, communication within those individual places is difficult, let alone if they're fragmented and they have to communicate in between different organisations. Yeah. So I think it is a problem, not insurmountable, but it is a problem.
Once again, that's all we have time for on this topic. Please do get in contact with us with any opinions that you have on that by the usual means. On to our final topic. Since opening its doors in 2010, Waves Community Centre in Slathwaite has offered young people and adults with learning difficulties and disabilities the opportunity to improve the quality of their lives. This week, Waves has announced the opening of a new adjoining space that will double the centre's size to accommodate a surge in popularity. We're lucky to have Waves Managing Director here with us today in the shape of Ben Wright. Ben, could you tell us a bit about Waves and some of the activities and services that take place there?
Yeah, we offer, our spiel is, we offer meaningful opportunities for adults with learning disabilities. So we try and offer fun things like archery or horse riding or going swimming, art, all the usual things. But the aspect of us that really seems to attract people is our independent living training and working in the community. So we set that up basically by having training in-house. So if we talk about just working in the community for a second, they may have a job within Waves for a little while. So there may be someone called the Buildings and Estates Manager, and he may have certain roles within the business. Starting off small, maybe half an hour a week, which would include, managing his own time, and then completing the task to a reasonable standard. Once he's shown that, he's capable and that he wants to do more, then we can start looking at getting a placement in the community. And the gentleman I'm talking about, who was our Buildings and Estates Manager, now works in the local wine bar in Slathwaite. And he sometimes serves food, he does a little bit of sweeping outside, he rolls up the cutlery. So he started off working there for about half an hour a week, and now he works there about 2 hours a week. So he's had quite a lot of progression. The only difference is it took him about 3 years to get to that point, so the time scale is just extended, that's all.
So how do you feel you've been received in your local community by local businesses? Really well.
They're like an extra facet to our business because they all know who we are, they all know our members. When we go into the village, part of who we are is we like the members to do as much for themselves as humanly possible. We've got the folded arm policy, which is quite hard for some carers because they want to do everything for everyone. But the point is that they should be doing as much for themselves as they possibly can, including if we go into the village, they want to buy themselves a drink, they can go into the shop. Hopefully the member of staff can stand outside the shop and let them do the whole thing on their own. Being in a little village like we are, and them all knowing us, makes that just a bit more simple.
Yeah. Do you like the sound of what you're hearing?
Oh, I do. I think it's absolutely critical that we have proper provision for people with learning difficulties who have the chance to progress and develop. And it seems to me that it's about self-confidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about not being oppressed by people who don't always, because they may appear different. Sometimes that seems to come out as hostility, and I think that's easier in a village, but I think it's something we should all aspire to, giving a role to everybody who has the ability to...
Sometimes it's just having the right boss, and someone who, someone may walk through the door and say, I can't employ him, no, it's too hard work. Walks into another place and he's perfect because the boss is different. Yeah. It's about those personalities.
Yeah. I know you've got the new expansion coming along nicely. How do you feel that will help you in providing your services?
So Waves, as it is now, is largely focused on these independent living skills and working in the community, as well as all the fun stuff. But waves, the second waves, as it will be when it opens on the 22nd of February, is going to be a lot more sensory, and will provide care to people that might not necessarily be looking at going into work at any point, or maybe living on their own. And these people would need a little bit more help just to access an activity, bring themselves out of themselves, you know, maybe too much, they're a little bit too internal. Maybe we're talking about someone that's high up on the autistic spectrum. So intensive interaction with them is just having, this what we're doing right now to them would be a big challenge, just having eye contact.
Yeah.
So in this centre we will hopefully be working with more people like that need just a little bit more of the basics of social interaction and things like that.
Yeah. And finally, how would somebody wanting to get involved at the centre, whether they're sort of volunteering or whether they're wanting to bring somebody down to use your services, how would they initially engage you?
We have a website which is wavesgroup.co.uk, which has a lot of information about us on there. It's got, if you wanted to apply for a job, it's got an application form. We've got a Facebook page that anyone can leave a comment on. You can see what we're up to. You can also just phone us, and most people can come and have a look round, and we'll show anyone round. Really, we're pretty friendly. Sometimes you have to wait till after everyone's gone home because of security, but apart from that, it's fine.
Right. That's great. Thank you very much for both of you for joining us. It's been a very good discussion today. That, I'm afraid, is all we have time for on this week's show. If you would like to contact the Weekly Wind-Up, you can do so by email, info@Kirklees Local TV, or you can also find us on Twitter, search @The Weekly Wind-Up. Please join us again next week for another show. I've been Kyle Warwick. Thank you and goodbye.